Good morning, everybody. Welcome. It is Saturday, week 1, and you are having breakfast with the Buzz. Joining me today, we've got Cyclops. Say hello, Cyclops.
Hello, Cyclops.
And we have 2020 below me. How you doing? Can you hear
awesome
me, 2020?
today. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I can. I'm doing great. We had football on Thursday. We got football tomorrow. We're doing fantastic. Couldn't be better.
We are doing a special edition Saturday morning early breakfast podcast with you guys so that we can get you ready for tomorrow's week 1 football games. The sole purpose of what we're going to do today is for you, to get you guys ready, so you know who's injured, who's starting, who's not starting, and then who do we recommend that you start? Who do we recommend that you sit? That's our job today. We're going to help you out, and we want to get your input too. We want to know who do you think we should start and sit. Give us a call, 772-800-BUZZ or 2899, and you can speak to us or make some comments in Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and we will address your comments as they come in. Guys, lots going on. We have the game Thursday night. We've got game Sunday. What are we going to do?
I'd like to, before we get into the start 'em sit 'em, and just so you know, during the start 'em sit 'em, we're not giving you start, Barkley.
Right.
you're going to start Barkley. We're going to give you some different. Yeah, we're going to give you some guys that down the line a little bit and why we think that. Anyway, I'd like to give my little bit of a take on the game from Thursday night. I didn't get to watch the whole game, but I did watch a good part of it. And, it was nice to see football. There was all the pregame things and the national anthem and all those things. But then we got to football, right? And basically it kind of looked like last year.
Yeah.
Casey looked great. Edwards-Helaire looked great. I wanted to bring up more about Houston and about Watson and the loss of Hopkins. I think this affected them as we know it would. As far as it was, I think it was the second pass of the first pass of the game. I think it was the second play of the game or third play of the game. And it was a little out, maybe 10, 12 yard out to Fuller. Right. And Watson puts it out there and Fuller goes up to try to catch it. And he looked like, it was his first day on the football field and he couldn't adjust and he couldn't do anything. And Hopkins makes that catch all day long.
Yeah.
Not only does he make that catch, but he runs for another 25 yards.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's no doubt without preseason, he's going to miss that chemistry. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
And, look, Will Fuller's been hurt for 20 years. I think that maybe he still has to get used to that dynamic.
Playing in a game.
It's going to be, it looks like Brandon Cooks went out late in the game. He kind of disappeared. So
but even before he went out, he wasn't getting targeted a lot, right, Commish?
Right. I believe
that was kind of surprising.
I believe he had 2 catches for 20 yards.
20 yards, yep.
Right. That was only 4 or 5 targets.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and I think this is possibly going to be an ongoing issue with that Houston offense. The right side of the line was getting beat up. They paid so much money to Laramie Tunsil, making him the number 1 tackle, or at least the highest paid tackle in the NFL. And now they've got guys on the other side. They had the first round draft pick from last year, which surprised everybody because they jumped up to get him early when nobody else wanted him, and he was getting beat all night Thursday night. So I think keeping an eye on this Houston offense. Yes, David Johnson was impressive.
Good.
He did look good. Showed that burst.
But we're also talking about a very soft Kansas City defense. So. It'll be interesting moving forward.
Again, for somewhat intensive purposes, this is like a preseason game, and you're seeing certain things, but they only have 16 games. They got to get to it, so it'll be interesting to see how they rebound.
With any football game, you always have your fantasy cap on of what did I learn from that? What can I take away from that? It's going to help me for the next 15 games of fantasy. And it's interesting, because you guys made a really good point. That really was, game 1, preseason game 1. So yeah, without DeAndre, that even in the first preseason game, Watson and Hopkins are going to have that chemistry that they've had for years. So who's going to be the guy? And I think a lot of us thought that was going to be Brandon Cooks because he usually is the wide receiver one on a team, even though Fuller's been there for a few years, but he's never healthy. So, it's interesting. Is the takeaway Fuller is going to be his guy? Was it for whatever reason that was the game script of that game? I think that's a question mark. I think it's too early to tell because if you judge by yesterday, Sammy Watkins is the guy in Kansas City, which is ironic how it was week 1 last year when Sammy Watkins exploded. Not only did he have more catches and yards, true, Hill had the touchdown, but he was targeted a lot more in that
Watkins
game.
Had a touchdown too.
Watkins did have a touchdown too. That's right.
Yeah.
But I'm saying Hill salvaged his night with the touchdown. But I'm not going to go crazy with what happened last night with the game flow and the game script, because Watkins had one great game, and then the rest of the year was mediocre at best. Where Hill is obviously always the guy. Nothing jumps off the page from last night, other than the fact that if you drafted Hilaire in the first round, you got paid because the boy can play. That kid can run. He's got a beautiful first cut. The offensive line looks good, but Houston's run blocking looks good as well. Good point, Commish, though, against a pretty soft defense. But I think we learned Johnson's going to be the guy. He got the great majority of the carries. Hilaire's the guy. It wasn't a little bit of a split like they were talking about. He really got the majority of rushes.
Yeah, I want to address real quick the fact that the Houston Texans defense was hurting in the middle. They were very soft. Derek McKinney just was not himself. I don't know how many times Clyde Edwards-Helaire spun out of McKinney's grasp. That entire middle. Kelsey had a field day in the middle. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I looked at that and I thought, can't you just cover 87? It's almost as if they don't know how to cover in the middle of that field. And when you think about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and everybody's getting excited about it, and I think he's going to be a really good running back in the NFL, and people are already anointing him as Barry Sanders. But I think we all need to remember that when people were stacking the box, Edwards-Helaire couldn't do anything. And if you saw him on the goal line, he was terrible on the goal line.
Oh, yeah, 3 attempts is true.
Outside. So if the Texans spread the field, they put in their 4 wide receiver set, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to have some room. They don't know who's going to get the ball. But when you get him in a position where it's 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1, goal line, there's going to be an issue. And you might see more of him being taken out on those plays. But, for anybody that did take him in the first round, you should be happy. I think you're going to have a very serviceable RB number 1 moving forward.
It was like a 65 to 35 split range between Helaire and Williams. And they used Williams a lot more inside the red zone. So, that's a little telling. And it may be early for that, but that's a little telling, following up on what you were talking about him not be able to get those tough yards.
Right. And then
they did try it, though. Like Commish said, they had Helaire in at the goal line. We saw him, try 2-3 times up the middle and couldn't get in. Let's hope that's not a consistency there. Yeah.
A few of the plays where just a few times where Kansas City had 3rd and long, Helaire wasn't in there. And I think they realized that he's not going to be able to be the guy to protect Mahomes. So they're still working on that, but that's typical of rookie running backs at this point. May not have the experience and the ability. J.J. Watt looked his age at this point. I'm not saying to have a good game. I saw that one play on the goal line where Edwards-Helaire spun out of him. He ended up getting knocked down by somebody else. But, we're starting to see now J.J. Watt's slow decline, and it's going to be sad as we move forward. I don't want to spend too much more time on this. I really want to get to some of the quick hits. I want to talk about the stardom, sit-em guys. But there is a trivia question that I thought you guys might find very interesting. We know, and it has to do with the game. We know that Houston and Kansas City, they kicked off the league, the start of the season on Thursday night. Both of those franchises, guys, were known as the Texans. We have the Dallas Texans and the Houston Texans. What other 2 franchises had the same name? There's only been one other duo of franchises that are still existing and playing in the NFL that had or have the same name. And I mean name, I mean the second name, the mascot or the team name, not the city. So we have the we have the Dallas Texans who are now the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Houston Texans who are actually the Houston Texans. Who are the other two teams? All right, that's our trivia question for tonight, guys. Injuries, people need to adjust their lineups. What's going on?
Well, I mean, a huge one that seems to be coming up is Kenny Galladay.
Right.
Yeah. He that surely puts a cramp in. And it's funny, some of these go into the stardom sit-em things that I have later, but that's a big one. He kind of didn't show up. Cortland Sutton with his shoulder is now questionable, right?
Yep.
After falling, and all these injuries seem to happen like after our draft.
Yeah.
Right.
Deebo Samuel's going to be out.
We know that Julio Jones, a second-round pick for many people, he was limited on Friday's practice. It doesn't mean that he's not going to do well. The word is he's going to start, he's going to play, but he was a little limited in the practice because of a hamstring yesterday.
Right.
Alshon Jeffrey's out. And let me tell you what that is interesting for. I don't know how many people are going to start him, but what that does, that makes Deshaun Jackson's stock rise just that much more, as well as Zach Ertz. Obviously, you were starting him anyway, but he looks like a much better start because you got those targets that are going to be just shared less around with Jeffrey out.
Well, staying in Philly, rookie wide receiver Jalen Reagor, who during the end of the preseason, whatever the preseason was called, had gotten hurt. And there was question of how he was going to deal with that shoulder issue, whether or not he was going to be active. But the truth of the matter is he is active. He will be playing tomorrow. If you have Jalen Reagor, you got to start him. They have obviously it's going to be the Goddard Ertz show, but you know that Reagor and Jackson are going to get some of those catches.
They got it. Yeah. How about Mike Evans?
Mike Evans,
doubtful.
Yeah, that's a big one. Doubtful.
That's a big one. A lot of people, how many drafts did you see Godwin and Edmonds go back to back or within 2 or 3 picks of each other? It was amazing. And now he's hurt. Obviously that affects Godwin, Gronkowski, Brate, OJ Howard, all these guys.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting one.
In Chicago, we heard a few weeks ago about David Montgomery, and everybody was jumping and running to get Tariq Cohen, figuring out who was going to be the running back in Chicago. Right. He was a full participant on yesterday in practice, and that was the second consecutive day. So even though he might be listed as questionable, from the sound of it, it looks like, unless there's going to be a problem, he is going to start, he is going to play. If you happen to have taken a flyer on David Montgomery late in the draft and you have no other choice, he might be a good RB2 or a flex play, so just keep an eye on David Montgomery.
Yep, and Devontae Parker, who was showed up on the injury report for a couple weeks, looking like he's going to play. So if you drafted him, and that should be a good play this week.
And what about old man AJ Green, guys, right? He hasn't played in, it seems like, forever. Even when he got back after his issues last year, he came into training camp and he had a hamstring issue. And it was like, okay, here we go again. Well, you know what, guys? Supposedly he's 100%. He's 32 years old. But this guy, don't downplay him. With Joe Burrow slinging the ball, I think AJ Green might be a good play.
I'm really interested to see who emerges as his top target in that offense between Boyd and Green. I mean, Burrow's got a lot of toys to play with between Boyd, Green, Mixon, and Boyd, Green, and Mixon. Those three is enough. So he's set up to succeed there.
Yep.
Yeah.
We also go ahead, Brad. I'm sorry.
No. You were talking about Green, and I have some predicaments with Green, and when we get to the start and sit list later, I'll explain a little bit more because I have him on our roster. And he's healthy, practiced, 2 full practices this week. He said he's healthy. I mean, the guy's a baller when he's in there.
Yeah.
Top 10 every year.
So one of the games that hits home, which we're all going to be watching, are the Dolphins and the Patriots. We know that N'Keal Harry is questionable for Sunday's game. Whether or not he plays, we don't know. He just popped up on the injury report a few weeks ago. So whether or not he plays, but with that offense, you never know what's going to happen. We know that Edelman was also hobbling. So what was already a poor offense or a bad offense or a questionable or revolving door offense has gotten even worse. So be careful if you think you're starting somebody on that Patriots offense.
Yeah, that's going to be a real interesting narrative to see how that develops. Where Edelman is, that slot guy that always grabs north of 90 balls a year. What's that going to look like with Cam Newton at the helm? I think a lot of people are interested to see what happens there.
Right.
And if you have T.J. Hawkinson as your tight end, he's supposedly 100%. You can go ahead and start him. T.Y. Hilton, he was MIA from practice yesterday. I'm not really sure. I have T.Y. Hilton. He's going to ride my bench this week. So, those are some of the fantasy. Oh, also, guys, keep an eye on Miles Sanders. He showed up as questionable. We still think he's going to play. But that's
another guy that I have. Thank you. And I've been watching this closely. They said they're going to make a decision about 90 minutes before game time, so I'll keep an eye on that tomorrow and see how he ends up. It looks like he's going to play. Not too worried about it. I'm not worried about him necessarily playing. I'm more worried about him not getting enough carries. Right.
And you're a Cam Akers guy, Brad, and I know the news just came out that Henderson is actually a go for Sunday. So whether or not it's going to be Cam Akers, Malcolm Brown, Darrell Henderson, who knows?
Right.
But we know that they're all going to play. We all know that they're going to be good. It's just a matter. It'll be also interesting to see who's going to be the bell cow there.
Right.
We have another rookie running back in a crowded backfield that just got cleared to play as well, which is DeAndre Swift. That was going to be interesting.
Yeah.
People were going after Carry-On, thinking that Swift might not play for the first 2 weeks, but he's been cleared.
Weeks, right?
Yeah, and now there's no injury designation. They went out and got AD. So, it'll be interesting to see how things clear out there. But Swift is obviously the most talented running back in that group. Don't know if I'd start any of them, but Swift is going to play.
Okay,
so we have a question. Someone put in a question. It is in a standard non-PPR scoring league, Robert Woods or Tyler Lockett?
For me, this is an easy one, right?
Okay.
The beauty of Robert Woods, to me, is the number of catches that he would get. If it's non-PPR, I'm going with Tyler Lockett. Here's a guy who's going to be getting the ball, has the yak. He's going to be able to catch a 25-yard pass and turn it into a 45-yard pass. So if we're really looking at standard non-PPR, to me, Tyler Lockett won't get as many catches as Robert Woods, but I think he's going to do more with those catches.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. Woods is a guy that's going to get like 8 for 90, range, and Tyler Lockett is going to be a guy that might get 5 for 120. Is kind of how you look at it.
I'm going to agree with that as well. I love Woods as well, but we all know he had 2 touchdowns last year that can't last this year, that can't carry over. That's just way too low. But if it's non-PPR, that's a no-brainer. It's got to be Lockett.
Yeah.
Lockett.
Here's a question from Todd: whether like Hurst or Fant at tight end in a PPR. I'll start this one off. We know both of them have a very high ceiling, right? We know both of them could do very well. Fant is a known entity. We knew what he did at the end of last year. He was coming on. Hurst, on the other hand, we can't look at last year. It was a different offense, a different team, a different system. But he was brought into Atlanta to make a difference this year. And if Hurst takes over that Austin Hooper spot, it's hard not to go with Hurst at this point.
I'm gonna disagree with you on this one. I hate to do this to Todd, but I'm gonna go with Fant here. Fant, all last year they were talking. He had to learn the position. He hadn't played tight end for a long time. He wasn't really a football player for that long, and he came into the system. He learned it, and by the end of the year, he was doing really well. And I think with that system there, I think with getting Melvin, I think it opens up the field when you have a Melvin Gordon in the backfield. It opens up that tight end position. Cortland Sutton, again, came up questionable. Could be a bigger role for Fant this week in that offense.
And I'm going to agree with that for exactly that reason, because if Sutton doesn't play and Fant exactly had to learn the position with 3 different quarterbacks throwing him the ball, but when it locked in and it was Drew Lock, he looked phenomenal. I think by the end of the year, though, Hayden Hurst will produce as the better tight end because Matt Ryan loves the tight end. He always makes his tight end shine in that offense.
So let me just say this. First of all, I think Hurst, being the quicker and smaller player of the two, has better chance of getting more receptions. Whether or not they're going to be touchdowns, whether or not they're going to be long pass plays, I think Hurst is going to get more receptions in a PPR. But I don't think that the difference between Hurst and Fant on Sunday, tomorrow, will be more than maybe 5 points. I don't think that this is
It won't be huge. Yeah.
I think they'll be close. But Todd, thank you for the question. We appreciate it. And we're going to go back to our trivia question. I'll put it up on the screen, but then we're going to jump to our stardom sit-em. And what we've done is we've each taken a position, and we're going to recommend to you who to start, who to sit. And like Brad had said at the beginning of the podcast, we're not going to talk about, starting
Christian McCaffrey or
right? If you have those top guys, you start them. If for whatever reason one of the top guys are not going to be available, or there is an issue, we will bring that up. But for the most part, if you have your top guys, you've got to start them. We're here to give you a little insight. We're here to show you a little bit about what some of the dilemmas that are out there. And what we'll do tonight is we're going to start at running back, and we're going to kind of offer you two guys that we think you should start at running back. Who's getting started?
So I did a couple more than two just because I liked what was going on here. So as Commish was saying, we're not talking about the guys that you're taking in the first 2 rounds. You're starting CMC all the way down through Miles Sanders and what have you. But we're talking about those middle of the road guys that you might have question marks on. So my first start sit, I really love literally the Indianapolis backfield today. They've got the best offensive line in football. They have an incredibly tasty matchup with Jacksonville. So my start here is whether you have Taylor or Marlon Mack and you've got a flex spot open and you're looking for someone to fill into that. I love Jay Taylor and Marlon Mack both. They're both a 1A, 1B. If you ask me, it's going to be a pretty even split against that Jacksonville defense. Colts are going to roll them. It's a good start. Secondly, with David Montgomery being cleared, that's a pretty tasty start as well against a not very good run defense in Detroit. Actually, my second one was Mostert, but we'll go into that. So I like Montgomery. He's going to get the volume. I don't think he's the most talented back out there. There's no question. But I like the scheme. They're going to try to run the ball and control the clock. And then my third, I love Mostert against Arizona. There's a lot of mouths to feed in that backfield. Again, we're just talking about guys that are on the cusp. All the other starts, who you're doing. Mostert's a nice start this week. They're going to want to try to control the clock there. Arizona doesn't have a very good front seven either. I think he'll get the volume and he should at least get a score. So those are my 3 good starts. On the sit-em side, a lot of people are looking at James Robinson, as the starter in Jacksonville, and he is going to be the starter. I don't like the matchup. What's that?
I said, but it's Jacksonville.
And that's the other point. It's Jacksonville. They're going up a pretty stout Indianapolis defense. So if you have him, sit him. If you have a better receiver to pop in there, I would. And another sit that I'm looking at is Leonard Fournette. People got excited about where he ended up in Tampa, but that's a pretty crowded backfield. And they're going up against a really good New Orleans defense. And I think that's going to be a shootout game there. So I don't like the game script for Fournette in that new system. I don't think he's going to thrive against New Orleans. And then my last sit is Antonio Gibson, who is the new starting running back, converted wide receiver into a running back in Washington. And he's going up against a pretty good defense. So I would be sitting Gibson as well.
Well, who you don't think Gibson is going to get a lot of plays? Or, because of the dynamic of who Gibson is, do you not feel that he's going to be getting a lot of those dump offs, a lot of the Chris Thompson type plays?
Some you got a couple other mouths to feed there. You got Bryce Love there as well. So it remains to be seen. This is, again, a team that a new running back converted, has had no preseason on a team that didn't run the ball fantastically last year either. And I think with the game script against Philly, they're going to be coming from behind a lot. I don't know if he's going to be their dump off guy. It's not a strong matchup for me against Philly. He's got their run defense isn't fantastic. I don't like what I think the game script is going to be.
Okay. Understand. So in conclusion, start your Indianapolis running backs, start David Montgomery, start Mostert in San Francisco,
Yep.
sit Robinson, sit Fournette, sit Gibson.
There you go.
All right. Sounds good.
So,
all right. Let's go ahead, Brad. What were we going to say?
I was saying, before we move on, we have another question here. From Jonah, do I start Matt Stafford versus Chicago or Drew Lock versus Tennessee? So, interestingly enough, both of these quarterbacks have receivers that showed up injured this week. Out of these two, I'm still going to go with Stafford. I think especially with Swift now healthy or playing, I don't know how healthy he is, but he doesn't have the injury status. I'm still going to go with, even though we just did talk about Fant and Melvin Gordon and all these things, it's almost like a 50-50 as you think talking it out, but I'm still going to go with Stafford here. He's Marvin Jones. And I just think he's a little bit more seasoned and can handle it better.
Yeah, I think we go back with the known entity, right? We go back with what we know. We know that Stafford is a fantasy beast, which is probably why, Jonah, you drafted him in the first place.
Right.
And I think maybe you took a flyer on Locke, which is great. But if you look at the last few games that Locke had, and trust me, I know it's a completely different offense. They've got Jerry Jeudy now and a lot more weapons with Melvin Gordon. But last year, Locke finished the year 208 yards, 192 yards, 177 yards, and only one touchdown in those games. You got to go with Stafford here if he's healthy, even without Galladay. I still think you have to go with Stafford. Keep Locke on your bench. He might surprise a lot of people. But for right now, for week one, you got to go with Stafford.
No, Brandon. What Stafford was doing for the first 6 games of last year, he was, I think,
we froze
up. He froze. I think we're
top
good.
7 quarterback.
There we go. He's back. He froze up there for a second.
I froze. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm just going to agree with you emphatically. What Stafford was doing, and I'm sure you got Stafford late. It's a great pick. He was having his best year last year until he got injured. He's got all the same people coming back, but even improved. I love Stafford this year as long as he stays healthy.
Okay.
All right.
So now we're going to move on to quarterbacks. And, of course, we would have said start Mahomes and start Watson. You're going to start Kyler Murray. You're going to start your Dak Prescott. You're going to start your top guys.
Yep.
So these are some of the guys you didn't really think about that you should start. I've got 2 of them. And the first one, if you happen to have seen the advertisement for our podcast this morning, it had a picture of the new quarterback for your Indianapolis Colts is Phillip Rivers. They're playing Jacksonville, and as luck would have it, no pun intended, his first start for his new team comes against one of the worst rebuilding defenses in the AFC. And they've completely gutted that defense. Right now, Jacksonville's supposed to be the favorite to end 2020 with the worst record, and they could easily have possibly the worst pass rush in the league. And I'll tell you, with a group of healthy wideouts, 2 solid tight ends, 3 running backs that can catch the ball, the Colts are absolutely loaded. And even though Rivers might not be considered, an every week starter, this first game, this is Rivers' territory. Something to keep in mind, guys, in his 9 career starts against the Jags, Rivers had a 24-5 touchdown to interception ratio at 119 QB rating. So, guys, week 1, even if you have somebody that you might have picked a little high, someone like Breeze, I'm going with Rivers, especially in week 1.
Can I say Rivers over the past couple years, and I like that start. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, very much.
I mean, he should be a beast there with those receivers and everything going on indoors, all of those things. But he seemed to thrive fantasy-wise when every week he was coming back from 21-point deficits.
Yeah.
And that's what made him more valuable fantasy-wise. Now, against Jacksonville, they may not have that issue, so you got to be a little bit careful, but they should come out slinging and, wanting to show the new offense and scoring.
I'll tell you what I also like is one of the biggest concerns when you even have a prolific quarterback going into a new system, there's always going to be that adjustment period. What's beautiful about this is Rivers' best seasons came when he was working in Frank Reich's offense. So this is a reunion for him. There should be very little learning curve. And you're right. He's got weapons galore. Pretty much it was always just Keenan Allen. So I love the pick, Commish. I think Phillip Rivers is going to thrive there. I picked him up late in a couple of leagues as my QB2. So I think that's a great start this week.
Okay. So QB number 2 that I recommend you start, you guys are going to be surprised. You probably are going to disagree with me, but you probably picked him somewhere in your mid-rounds, but I'm thinking you're starting Carson Wentz. And let me explain to you why. And we already talked about the fact of the injuries that are happening over in Philly. But we know that they've surrounded Wentz with better talent than he had last year. But they're going to go into week 1 with Deshaun Jackson, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, Miles Sanders most likely. Rieger's going to be healthy. And guys, they're playing the Washington football team.
That's the key.
Secondaries in the NFL. You
should have just started with that.
I know, but over the last 5 weeks of 2019, they gave up the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Wentz, he had some of his best games against Washington. He had 25 points the first game, 21.5 points the second game. Now you're putting him in with a better team against a worse defense. You got to go with Carson Wentz this week. All right. Now we're going to move to sit 'em. There's 2 guys that I would stay away from. One guy you probably both of these guys you might have gotten at the end of the draft. One you might be thinking, how is he on a sit 'em list? But let me explain. The first one to sit is Baker Mayfield. Why? Yes, they're playing Baltimore. We know that the Ravens offense is the Ravens offense. I mean, the Ravens defense is the Ravens defense. They allowed the second fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. And going into a new system, they've got Kevin Stefanski calling the plays now. We don't know what to expect from the Browns. So you don't want to take a chance of having their quarterback, but you don't know what's going to happen against one of the best defenses in the league. Sit Baker Mayfield. The second one, guys, is Aaron Rodgers. Now, when was the last time we sat here and we talked about sitting Aaron Rodgers? And
last year.
Surprised to see. I'm sorry.
Last year, he had 2 or 3 good games.
Well, he was hurt. Yes.
Yeah.
But now, right? He's no longer this must start. And in the last 2 seasons, we're playing the Vikings, by the way. And then the last 2 seasons, he's played him 4 times. He only averaged 226 passing yards and 1 touchdown, which is 16 points, 11 points, 14 points, and 7 points. That was the old Aaron Rodgers 2 years ago, right? So as far as I'm concerned, you've got to stay away from Aaron Rodgers. That Minnesota defense, even though they lost Griffin, they're still going to have an incredible defense. You got to stay away from Aaron Rodgers this week.
You know, Aaron Rodgers is interesting, right? He was so great, and people still took him high last year, and he didn't have a very good year fantasy-wise. It's almost like he's a head case there. Like that whole situation there is very volatile.
Right.
And he's like, well, they took another quarterback. They don't want me here. This, they're kind of going through this cat and mouse game. So how is it going to respond this year? Is he going to go out and try to have this, just chucking the ball all over the place to try to say, okay, now trade me and I want to go somewhere else, or I'll show you, all these things, what's going to happen? And I kind of, against Minnesota, it's a little bit of a tougher matchup.
Well,
I think he's going to have a decent game. I think he's going to have an average fantasy game. And I don't think it's going to be bad, but if you have someone else, I would start them.
And you're not going to win with average. But we do have a question about quarterbacks here. Wentz over Russell Wilson? No.
No.
Don't get me wrong. If you have one of the lower tier quarterbacks, you go with Wentz this week. Wentz is going to have a good game. But to sit Russell Wilson against Atlanta, you don't do that, especially week 1. You go with an offense that's been playing together for a while. You go with Russell Wilson over Carson Wentz this week.
We have another question, Matt Ryan or Josh Allen, and that's interesting because I know Josh Allen's a highly rated quarterback, but I love Matt Ryan here. Obviously, the talent surrounding him, but the volume. Atlanta throws the ball literally more than any other team in football. And I know they've upgraded their running back, which wasn't too hard with Gurley, but I really like Matt Ryan here. Allen's going to use his legs. He might give you a touchdown on the ground. Really depends on your scoring, but to me, this is a no-brainer with Matt Ryan.
Before you go that far, Julio Jones showed up on the injury report, and if he can't go, that's a different team. Yes, he still loves to throw the ball. He doesn't have Hooper. He has Hurst. Does that connection happen right away? Game one. So there's some question marks there. On the other end, Josh Allen, I'm not granted, history says go with Matt Ryan here. I get it. But is Allen, they're going against the Jets, and they're going to want to show off Diggs, their new acquisition. And they have some talent around that quarterback as well. Now we know he has to come within 10 yards of throwing to them, but if he can do that, he could put up some interesting numbers this week.
Yeah, for some
reason. So you're
reason,
saying Allen over Ryan?
For some reason, Josh Allen was the darling of fantasy boards. He started up pretty high. He started dropping. We know they're playing the Jets. We know how bad the Jets' backfield is, but as far as I'm concerned, you got to go with the known entity. You got to go with the guy who every single week is going to get you points, is going to get you touchdowns. Right. They played the Jets last year. Buffalo played the Jets last year in week 1, and Josh Allen actually had over 250 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. But it's a different Josh Allen. It's a different team. They're going to be doing a lot of running in Buffalo this week. As far as I'm concerned, you got to go with Matt Ryan this week. Maybe later on in the season you'll start Josh Allen, but you got to go with the new entity.
And I couldn't agree with you more. This is where sometimes we get a little too cute. We get a little too finessey with players and the matchups. Play the guys that you're supposed to play. You don't sit. Matt Ryan was clearly your first QB, and I'm sure you took him in a much higher round. Well, actually, not really. I mean, Josh Allen was ranked QB7. I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah, right. But don't out finesse yourself. I'm going to make a bold prediction as well. I don't know if you guys want to do this at all. I'm starting my own little segment here, but I think Ryan Fitzpatrick. Granted, it's not a phenomenal matchup because New England does have a pretty good defense, and they got one of the best corners in the league. Okay. But if you look at what Fitzpatrick did against New England, and for whatever the way the Dolphins play New England, Fitzpatrick might find himself, and I'm not saying to start him, because I'm sure there's 10 other quarterbacks that you selected, in your league. He's probably not even on the roster. But my bold prediction is Patrick's going to find himself on the cusp of a top 10 quarterback this week. I'm saying 250 yards, somewhere between 250, 300, and 2 to 3 touchdowns this week. I think he's going to look good.
All right. So there's our quarterbacks. You got our quarterbacks. You got our running backs. Let's go to wide receivers. Who are we starting? Who are we sitting?
Okay. So, your obvious one's not going to talk about. How about Michael Gallup going against the Rams? Okay, you have Amari Cooper with an unknown injury that they're doing all kinds of crazy next generation things on his back and all these different things. They really haven't told us. So I'm a little concerned about Cooper and the fact that he's going against Jalen Ramsey, who completely shut him down last year. So you're going against essentially one of the best cornerbacks in the league with Cooper. So it opens up Gallup. Yeah, they have CeeDee Lamb. Yeah, they have Elliott. But Gallup just seemed to suck up all these targets last year when Cooper, wasn't having a great game or he was getting double teamed and all these things. So start Michael Gallup.
All right.
He's, I see him getting 8 catches for, 100 plus yards and a touchdown. That's a good start from, one of your wide receivers that you picked up in the 6th round or later possibly. And we talked about this guy. A couple of these guys, feed into what we were talking about earlier. Deshaun Jackson. He's good for 1 or 2 games a year. This could be that game. They're going against Washington. We know that there's no Alshon Jeffrey. Fabian Moreau, who is their top cornerback there, it gave up. He gave up 11 touchdowns last year. Again on the road.
Jackson will have a good game. There's
He
no
will.
doubt about that. I think everybody. The question is between Ertz and Goddard and Jackson and now Rieger, who's going to get the bulk of them? But Jackson's going to be the guy to spread the field. He's going to be getting those long catches.
Right.
And if you play one of those in one of those leagues, if Jackson returns a punt and you get the points for that, that's something else.
Right. So I have one more start here. Julian Edelman. I know he's a little banged up. He's going to play. Everything I've heard, he's playing. He's going against the Dolphins. As you can see in our shots here, the Heat hat, the Dolphin hat. We come from South Florida. We're Dolphin fans. But the realistic thing is, Cam Newton and he have had apparently a great connection in camp. I think you'll see Newton looking to him a lot, especially with N'Keal Harry questionable, so you don't know if he's going to play. I think Edelman's going to have like one of these games. He might have 12 catches this game just because he's going to be looking to him. So I think a lot of people were able to pick up Edelman 10th round or later in most drafts. And, I think that maybe 8th round or later. He was later rounds. He wasn't, the Edelman of the past several years where you were picking him in drafts.
Right.
So,
a couple questions, a couple of start sit questions here. Some great options. He's asking, I'm assuming this is in a flex position, to go with AJ Green, Jerry Jeudy, Rieger, or Singletary in a PPR. Now, that's a tough one. I could tell you I would eliminate Jeudy and Rieger. And for me, this is down to Devin Singletary and AJ Green. And
no, I think let me get this and Todd chime in if we're wrong. I think he's saying he's starting Keenan Allen and AJ Green. He's got to take 2 flexes now. So out of the 3 players, Jeudy, Rieger.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. I didn't see that top line. You're right.
Which flex is he going to?
So it is. So it's Jeudy, Rieger, or Singletary. That's correct. So I mean, for me, this is easy. When you have an option. When you have receivers, especially in this situation, that are a little unknown, phenomenal, obviously in college, but Devin Singletary, even though he's probably going to be giving up some carries to Zach Moss, they're going to roll the Jets here. I see Devin Singletary getting at least 15 carries. So that's 15 times, hands on the ball, probably going to be the goal line back as well. Right. And he's going to get some catches. To me, that's pretty easy layout with Singletary there.
Now, normally I would answer by saying Rieger over Jeudy, however, because of who they're playing and who's starting. But the fact that he was injured, yes, they said that he's going to be playing. I'm still concerned that as a rookie, as an injured rookie, that he might be a little limited. Given that it's a PPR, I think they're going to unwrap the present that is Jerry Jeudy. And, it's a tough call. I think both of them are going to probably have good games, or at least close to each other. But in this case, it's a toss-up to me. I'd probably go with Jerry Jeudy just because we know he's healthy.
Yeah, I would go with that as well. Jeudy and Singletary. Singletary for obvious reasons. And, Rieger, I think Rieger is going to be the 4th option there, and being a little nicked up. It's going to be Jackson, Goddard, and Ertz. And then Sanders if he plays, so it might be like the 5th option. So you might be looking at 3 or 4 catches, if he plays. I would probably go with Jeudy here as well.
Yeah, another good
himself, guys. So after all of that, he was saying his wide receivers 1 and 2 are Michael Thomas and Metcalf, and the others are flex options. In that case, you got to go with Keenan Allen and AJ Green. I don't think that there's a question in my mind. Now, maybe Singletary over AJ Green, just because we don't know what's going to happen there in Cincinnati. But Keenan Allen to me is a must start. I would go with Keenan Allen and Devin Singletary as your flexes.
Here's another good question, because we talked about Jonathan Taylor as a good start this week in that awesome backfield against the weak front 7. But the question is Miles Sanders or JT. And again, this is where I wouldn't get cute. Miles Sanders was obviously one of your 1st or 2nd round picks, probably 2nd round pick. I love JT, but Sanders has a pretty tasty matchup as well. So to me, that's a no-brainer to go with Miles Sanders over Jonathan Taylor.
So he is a little nicked up, and we'll see if he plays. I think he's going to play. I think he's going to be fine. Last year against Washington, formerly known in the Redskins last year, now the football team. He had I think 130 yards rushing and like 6 catches for 50 yards receiving that game. I think it was week 13 or 14. I have him, so I was doing a little bit more research on that. So, if he starts, I go with Sanders here, 100%.
But guys, here's the big problem, and this is something that we're all going to experience throughout the season, right? Taylor starts at 1:00, right?
Yeah.
And Sanders starts at 4:00.
Right.
If they're going to claim that Sanders is inactive, we won't know about it by the time he has to determine whether or not to start Taylor. As far as I'm concerned, we know that Mack is starting. We know that Taylor will come in to spell him. So unless Sanders is not playing, and he is questionable, he's not doubtful, I go with Sanders at this point. I think you have to do it. And if you just have to take a shot, take a chance. I don't know if you have any other running backs on your roster. So in the event that you start Sanders, do you have anybody else at 4:00 or Sunday night or Monday night that you can start just in case Sanders ends up on the inactive list?
Yeah, if Boston Scott didn't get drafted, which is possible, I would definitely grab him if there's someone that's marginal on your team that's just taking up a roster spot. So if you do go with that, you can throw in Boston Scott, who's next guy up.
All right, guys, we appreciate the questions. Keep them coming. We'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and comment in Facebook Live or in YouTube Live, or you can always just give us a call at the Buzz, and you can ask your question live on the air. Give us a call at 772-800-BUZZ. You can ask your questions or comment on Facebook Live or YouTube Live. Brad, you had talked about 2 quarterbacks. 2 wide receivers we should start. Who are the ones that we should bench?
So it goes along with Michael Gallup is Amari Cooper. Now I know he was going to be in the top 3 rounds this year. I don't see it happening this week. I just talked about it. He's going against Jalen Ramsey. He's also.
Did you just say you want to sit Amari Cooper?
Yep, sit Amari Cooper this week. He was completely shut down last year by Ramsey.
Okay.
Yep, sit Amari. Hey,
wow.
Not here to sugarcoat it.
But you obviously have to have some really good receivers to sit somebody like Cooper, who was probably drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round. You're suggesting people to sit one of their top picks because of the matchup this week.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right.
Yep. Jarvis Landry coming off of hip surgery. It's like this double. He's coming off the hip surgery, so I think they're going to ease him in a little bit. We know he's a beast. He's just a target, hoarder. He's excellent. But he has to play Baltimore. Baltimore's D is tough, and I just don't see them moving it enough for Landry to have a good enough game. Now, Landry's a guy you got down a little bit further. Jarvis Landry, Amari Cooper. I'm in this predicament. I have AJ Green and Julian Edelman. I think on my roster have to choose between these two. So I put Edelman on my start list, right? And I'm putting AJ Green on my sit list. And it's crazy because we're talking about him like he could be a beast this week. They're going to have to throw to someone. And
it's interesting. We all know the reports out of camp was Burrow is in love with Boyd. He said he's going to have a monster year. He said nothing like that about Green. Granted, he had some limitations in practice. Boyd, but it seems like Boyd's clearly the guy there. Green, it's going to remains to be seen. But you can't argue the fact this guy's healthy, plays a full season. He's a top 7 wide receiver every year.
Well, Green up until this past week was kind of in and out of practice because he was, hamstring injury and whatnot. But then he practiced this week. He practiced Monday. He practiced Wednesday. He's like they're saying he's 100%, as we talked about earlier. I just don't know. It's like I have to make this decision: Edelman or Green in my lineup. So we'll see how that plays out. But if I go by my own start, bench list, I guess I'll have to start Edelman.
All right. Edelman's gonna see a lot. I mean, Byron Jones, X, and Noah are all going to be on the backfield. It's going to be an interesting defense for Miami. So, we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. We're now going to move on to tight ends, guys. Keith, are you doing tight ends?
I think Brad was doing that.
Okay, Brad, you doing tight ends?
No, I thought actually, Seth, you were doing that with quarterbacks.
Yeah, you were doing that quarterback.
Oh, I had defense.
Well, we could all take it.
Well, let's do this. I'm going to move on to defenses, guys. Well, you start putting your thoughts together on tight end. But let's start with defenses, and I think that the biggest no-brainer is probably Bills versus Jets. The only reason I'm putting them on here, and we said you don't want to necessarily put your top defenses up here, is that some people might have drafted San Francisco, Pittsburgh ahead of the Bills. I think you start the Bills this week. They finished as a top 10 fantasy unit last year. Most of it is because, not most of it, a lot of it is because they played the Jets twice last year. They averaged over 9 fantasy points against the Jets last season, and the Jets were actually only one of 4 teams to allow an average of 10-plus fantasy points per game to opposing defenses. So right now, you got to start the Bills over the Jets. The other one that I have is actually, and we talked about Phillip Rivers earlier, was because of the matchup, the same thing on the defense. That Colts defense is a different defense, and they're playing Jacksonville. So they were kind of, last year, Indianapolis was kind of a middle-of-the-pack defense, but they've added DeForest Buckner in the front 7. They think that Xavier Rhodes will go back to, how he was before as an all-pro player. But really, it's the matchup. The Jags are a complete mess. They're juggling their options in the backfield between 2 undrafted free agents. At wideout, they have Chenault, who is banged up. Dede Westbrook slid to number 5 on the depth chart. That is a terrible offense. If you have the Colts, this is your play. Go with Indianapolis. On the sit side for defense, we talked about Edelman. We talked about the Patriots. I think you sit the Patriots against Miami. And this is not just a homer move. We know last year Patriots defense was one of the best in fantasy football probably ever. But it's a completely different Patriots defense. Not only did they lose Tom Brady, they lost Kyle Van Noy, Danny Shelton signed with the Lions. Harmon was traded to the Lions. Landon Roberts is now with the Dolphins. The Patriots are still expected to be okay, but they're coming in to play a surprisingly tough Miami Dolphins squad that gave up the 8th fewest fantasy football points to opposing defenses over the last 5 games of 2019. This isn't the Miami Dolphins that played in the first 10 games. These are guys that actually on that offense was very impressive at the end of the season. And now they've got Preston Williams back from injury. They've got Matt Breida, Jordan Howard, all of the weapons. Perry, I'm telling you, this is going to be a different game than what we've seen. I think the Patriots defense that you might want to start, you don't do it this week.
I'll tell you what else, Commish. The biggest knock on the Patriots defense, along with all the major losses, is their offense. This is no longer Tom Brady moving the chains consistently. Cam Newton has not looked good for a little while, actually. So their offense is going to keep their defense on the field a lot more. You're going to see a lot more yards and points run up against them. I just don't think they're going to be as efficient. So I think it is a good play. Or a good sit. Yeah.
A good
I don't agree. I agree with that sit, but I think you're gonna see some interesting things out of Cam Newton and that offense. Just because you take like Jacoby Brissett, right? You throw him in the New England offense and he looks good, or he's serviceable, right? You have Cam Newton as an MVP player. Yeah, he's been injured and whatnot. All the film I've seen of him in camp, he's looked good. Now I'm not a huge Cam Newton fan, but you take coaches like that and that can put players in their best position to do what they can do best. And I think you might see some interesting things out of him.
Maybe. Brady did not look great last year. His numbers were not fantastic, and that's Tom Brady. And even though he's 68 years old, he's still better than Cam Newton. And Brady's numbers have been declining. Well, specifically, the start of it was last year. So I hear what you're saying, because Belichick is a system guy and he's a quarterback whisperer. I just feel like Cam Newton, he's just not the same guy, and I don't think he fits phenomenally well into that system. I think Belichick's going to try to mold him into it, and it's going to take some time. Remember, no preseason to come into that system. So I think that offense is going to struggle. Dolphins defense, that might be one of the best secondaries in football right now with the X factor and Byron Jones. So I agree with Seth. I think the offense is going to struggle. I think the Dolphins D might be an interesting play this week, which you would never do, of course. But watch to see some defensive scores from them possibly.
Right. Okay. Well, the last defense that I recommend that you sit, which would be one of their top defenses, probably a top 10 defense. And Brad, this comes back to the Cooper pick. I think you sit the Rams against Dallas. Well, don't get me wrong. We know about Jalen Ramsey. However, when Ramsey was not in the lineup, right, they were ranked. They were ranked as one of the bottom defenses in the league. With him in the lineup, they were one of the top. However, he was in the lineup, as you mentioned, when they played Dallas last season. I mean, last season in Week 15. And even though he shut down Cooper, the rest of the defense was terrible, and they actually ended up with -4 points last year when they played Dallas. And that was Dallas without CeeDee Lamb, now with another year with Jarwin hanging in the back of the end zone. Oh, and did I mention they still have Ezekiel Elliott? Look,
he's old.
Option, rather than playing the three-headed monster of Cooper, Gallup, Lamb, then you got Jarwin and hitting the Rams this week. If you have somebody better, you got to go with it and just take the Rams, sit them this week, and then you can always start them moving forward.
Yeah. Look, I didn't say that Dallas would have a bad game. I'm just saying, Cooper might have a tough game.
Yeah.
So,
I'll tell you from a defensive standpoint, something you want to look out for as well is Chicago, which was a highly drafted defense. Khalil Mack showed up on the injury report, and that is a much different front seven without him roaming the middle of the field. So you want to take a look at that because that might be a sit if Mack is not playing.
Okay, so we're going to go to tight ends, but I did want to show the trivia question one more time. Houston and KC, they kicked off the season on Thursday. Both of the franchises were originally known as the Texans, the Dallas and the Houston Texans. What other two existing franchises have the same name? They are currently playing in the NFL. If you happen to know the answer, give us a call at 772-800-BUZZ, 772-800-BUZZ, or comment Facebook Live or YouTube Live.
Okay.
Do you guys have a guess, by the way?
What's that?
Either of you guys have a guess?
Well, I remember when Houston first came to Tennessee. Didn't Tennessee call themselves – did they call themselves the Oilers for a little bit at first before they went to the Titans? Does that count?
I don't know, but that's not the answer.
Okay.
Because right now – right.
I'll just be over here.
There are no Houston Oilers playing, so it would have to be a team that has –
where the name is still playing.
Currently playing. One under the current name, one is not playing under that name. So who are those teams?
So is it the Browns and the Ravens?
No, sir.
No. My only other thought was the Giants, because I thought the Jets were once the Giants, and then the Giants were the Giants. The New York, that's a guess, but that would be my last guess with any kind of actual.
You're getting a little closer, but just to go back to answer to Brad, you didn't have the Baltimore. You didn't have the Baltimore
right. It wasn't
Ravens, right? You had the Colts, so you could say the Indianapolis Colts and the Baltimore Colts,
right.
But that's not the answer.
Yeah, Cleveland became Baltimore, and Baltimore was over the Ravens. It was never the Baltimore Browns.
We do actually have a guess here. The Rams and the Cardinals.
Oh yeah.
No, that is not.
Sorry, Jeffrey.
It's the same. That's the same franchise.
Same franchise.
Oh, right. LA Rams became the St. Louis Rams. Right. That was the franchise. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on to tight ends. Guys, who are we starting? Who are we sitting?
So, good. Okay. So obviously there was a little miscommunication here, so we didn't have this quite prepared, but I'm going to throw one out there to start. Gronk. Okay. I saw Gronk go all over the place in drafts. I saw him go in the 3rd round. I saw him go in the 15th round. I saw him go in the 10th round. He was all over the place. League. And he's not even drafted in our league. So
Is that a starter or a sit for you?
That's a good question. I'm going to start him. Okay, I'm going to put him in as a start mainly because of Evans. You take that aspect out of their offense, and it just going to create targets for other players. And I think Gronk will get extra targets because of that.
That's just a crowded tight end position, though, with a very talented O.J. Howard and even Cameron Brate that shows his head up a lot. That's just if it wasn't so crowded, I might agree with you. But
they'll probably be running a lot of 2 tight ends, almost similar to what they did with Gronk and the Murderer.
Yeah.
So here's another one that I have, and we talked about this earlier when somebody had a question about Hayden Hurst. What we didn't talk about, and yes, you got to start Hayden Hurst. What we didn't talk about was that the Seahawks, who Atlanta plays, they were brutal against tight ends last year.
They got killed.
Third fantasy points, giving up over 1,000 yards in that position overall. So, look, if he's going to step in to where Austin Hooper was, you got to start Hayden Hurst this week.
I absolutely agree. He was one of my 2. And the other one, I know we just talked about him. If Cortland Sutton is not playing, I really do like Noah Fant here. The chemistry that he had with Locke, when Locke was finally locked in as the quarterback, Fant was ripping it up. And without Cortland Sutton playing, I know they've got Judy there. I really do like Lott this week. And one of the questions that we have on tight ends is, in a half-point PPR, Blake Jarwin or Jack Doyle. Now, this is interesting. If Amari Cooper is playing, I'm going to take Jack Doyle. You know what? Even if Amari Cooper is or isn't playing, I still like Jack Doyle here. Jarwin is more of a blocking tight end. He came on a little bit last year. He's way deep in that target share. What I like about Jack Doyle, no more Eric Ebron. He's the only guy there. And Phillip Rivers loves, I got to say it again, but he loves the tight end. Forever he made Antonio Gates a star. He loved peppering it to Hunter Henry. Phillip Rivers, he always hits that seam outlet. He loves throwing to the tight ends. And Jack Doyle is a very serviceable tight end. So in that situation, I would go Doyle.
Well, let me curb your enthusiasm for a second. I'm not necessarily saying that you're wrong, okay? We know that Trey Burton isn't there, so Doyle is really going to be the guy to get any of the tight end catches that they have in Indianapolis. However, what we have seen, if you're going to look at history at all, we know that the Jaguars, as bad as they are, they do have Doyle's number. And he failed to score more than 10 points in all but one of their last 9 matchups. Their defense was not a pushover against tight ends last season, despite not being a great team. They only allowed 4 catches and 11 points on the average last year.
But Commish, you're talking about the pre-2020 Jacksonville Jaguars.
I understand that. No, I understand that, and although their defensive line has changed significantly, I'm not saying. I'm just saying it's a very difficult fade for me if you're going to sit Jack Doyle. But to be honest with you, I think Blake Jarwin, he's had a fantastic camp, and I know that they have a lot of weapons there. But because of that, because the safeties are going to have to concentrate on the three, on Gallup and on Cooper and on Lamb, you're going to have a slow linebacker covering Jarwin. I like Jarwin here. I understand why you like Doyle. I think it's a 50-50 shot here. I don't think that.
Interesting. Cyclops, tiebreaker.
Right. So Jarwin was interesting last year. He would come out and have, a couple touchdowns and a decent game, and then he would kind of disappear, or he'd come out and have a good quarter and then disappear for the rest of the game. I ended up picking him up on my roster late in the year, and it seemed like it was never a consistency with him. Now maybe that's changed. It's a whole camp, and there's more receivers there now to take attention away from the tight end. I get that, but I'm going with Doyle here. As we very quickly were doing some stardom sit-ems for tight end here, Doyle was right on my stardom list. I like him, and for the same reasons as 2020, is that Rivers really, the tight end seems to be
the focus for him.
It's not just his focus, but it's kind of his outlet.
Right.
He always his tight ends have traditionally done well.
Right.
I don't, I see Doyle's value go up this year because of that. And this week, especially against Jacksonville, I think he should do well.
Yeah, he's kind of like a Matt Ryan, where Matt Ryan loves hitting the tight end in pressure outlet situations and focusing on him.
So which tight ends are we sitting this week?
So actually, before that, you have a guess for the trivia here.
Okay.
If you see it there, it is from Todd. It is Steelers and Eagles.
No, that is not correct.
Sorry.
You know what? I'll go ahead. I'll give the answer now. The answer is the Tennessee Titans and the New York Titans, who are now the New York Jets. Two completely different franchises who had the same name. You didn't have the move from one city to another. You didn't have Art Modell renouncing the entire history of a team. So it's not the Ravens, but it is the Tennessee Titans, who used to be, and that's why I said you were close. They were the Houston Oilers, and then you had talked about, Brad, Keith, you also mentioned the Giants and the Jets. So the answer is the New York Titans and the Tennessee Titans.
Interesting question.
So I'll start off here. One tight end to be a little bit careful of this week, and I'm sure he was in the top 5 or 6 of tight ends drafted, is Evan Ingram. Now, I think he's going to have an okay week, but tight ends are an interesting position. Sometimes they're grouped in with wide receivers, and so there's only 5 or 6 taken. But the Steelers are very tough against the tight ends traditionally, and that's just something you want to be careful of. They will shut that down. I do think that the Giants' offense is better laid out this year between Shepard and Slayton. Obviously Barkley and Ingram, and the quarterback, Jones, they say he's had a great offseason. He's put on muscle and he looks really good. But I am a little nervous just because it's Pittsburgh. And I think Pittsburgh with Roethlisberger back is going to be playing at a little higher level with a little bit of chip on their shoulder week 1.
All right.
So my sits are, ironically, one of the top tight ends in football last year is Hoop. For the sole reason that Mayfield, just historically in his 2.5 years, really doesn't focus much on the tight end. He loves the slot. He loves Landry. I'm hoping and looking for a bounce back year for OBJ. Not to mention they've had Njoku there for the last 3 years, who if he has any kind of chemistry, it's with him. But Hooper was a stud last year. I think in this system, he's not going to be nearly the same tight end as a focus. And
Njoku has actually found himself third on the depth chart. He hasn't been having a good camp. They're really not high on him. However, you said solely because of the Baker Mayfield issue. I think it's solely because of who they're playing. They are playing a team that last year gave up the fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends. They only gave up 3 touchdowns all season.
That's amazing.
The Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah.
And now you're coming into a team that I agree, Keith, that is playing a team that isn't tight end strong. They did go out and spend the money to get Austin Hooper, but this is not Atlanta.
Not the week to play him. Yeah.
This Cleveland's Austin Hooper. I couldn't agree with you more. Austin Hooper.
Yep. And honestly, I'm gonna disagree with you there, Cyclops on Gronk. I don't like the matchup. The Saints have a very good defense. Like I said, there's OJ Howard is still there with Braid. I do see them coming out in 2 tight end sets. Bless you. In 2 tight end sets. I don't like Gronk this week, if just for any reason why. The Saints have a pretty good front 7. So I think he's going to have a hard time. And this is not the same Gronkowski. Hasn't been for years.
Right. He's rested.
Right. So you've got our stardom, sit-em list, guys. We went through all of our positions. Obviously, we're not going to do kickers.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, you just start the kicker you drafted, and that's it. I actually, made a mistake when I drafted, and I dropped a kicker, and I picked up a new one because I can't believe that my kicker was actually that a certain kicker was actually available. But we're not gonna deal with kickers during fantasy unless there's a question about it. We're just gonna go QB, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and defense.
Perfect.
All right. So I think that ends the show, unless Keith, you wanted to talk about something else.
No, I thought something that we could do maybe at some point, if we have a little more time left in the show because we're over, is we could talk about some of our own lineups. Put our money where our mouth is. Take a look at some of the drafts we had and some of the stardom situm decisions that we're going through in our own lineups. I have one in my wide receiver spot with Cortland Sutton now having to sit to make a decision. Do I want to go with Marvin Jones or Deshaun Jackson? And that became very
on Jackson.
I agree. But with Kenny Golladay now out, Marvin Jones is an interesting spot there. But again, you've got Alshon Jeffrey out, so it's an interesting call. But I think the matchup, right? It's too tasty of a matchup for Philadelphia.
What about this, guys? One of the issues that I have on mine is that I've got Stephon Diggs and T.Y. Hilton, and we know about T.Y. Hilton being MIA from camp yesterday. And T.Y. Hilton now has Phillip Rivers as his quarterback, so we don't have to worry about the Jacoby Brissett issue. And Stephon Diggs, who is a guy who's going to get you 10 points every week, is now in Buffalo.
So have they not said anything about why Hilton wasn't there? Nothing's come out yet?
Nothing that I have yet.
Nothing. Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen anything either. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, they're similar game scripts because both of your receivers are playing against awful teams. You've got Indy playing against the Jags and Buffalo playing against the Jets. So the game script can be interesting, but I don't know, with Ty being on the possibly on the injury report, he's got the better passing quarterback. I might have to go Diggs here, all depending. But if they're both healthy, I think I would go Ty because I think Rivers is going to sling the rock around.
Right. Okay, that sounds good, guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to move our show to Tuesday nights, and on those Tuesday nights, we're going to talk about the games that were the previous week. We're also going to give you advice on who to pick up for that week and who to start and sit for the games for that week. So we're going to try that on Tuesday nights, and we hope you guys will join us. It's going to be a fun show. We love having the interaction. We want your questions during the show. We want your calls during the show, and we really appreciate all of you out there who are listening.
Enjoy Sunday.
All right, enjoy tomorrow. Yep.
All right, guys.
Have a good one.
Time. Take care.